we're actually in good shape now on time, and so we're going to open this up to questions. I would ask individuals to go to the mics, and I'll try to take your questions and direct them either to one of my colleagues or myself here. First one in front.
Yeah. You know, I was amazed at the data here on how bad the standard error of the mean is to show the variation in experimental data. The standard error of the mean was really made, basically, the example I give is if you have a prospector coming in with their ore, it tells how good the data is to reach the percent ore. It was never meant for showing the variation in data, which you clearly showed. So I'm glad to hear that JBC is thinking of actually making refinements, because I see no reason that any paper in the JBC should use standard error of the mean to show variation of data. It's just too manipulative and just minimizes that. And so I'd like to hear, why you say you prefer the standard deviation, because that's the right one, but why is the standard error of the mean even acceptable at all?
I think that's your question, Roger.
Yeah, so this has been a topic of considerable discussion among the associate editors, and I think part of the reason, personally, I would like to see us evolve towards that, definitely, but I think it's so ingrained in the sort of norms right now that it will be hard to sort of make a hard cutoff. So we're trying to take this sort of first step where we're pushing people towards the standard deviation, and
but you're pushing anyway now, right? It's a chance, with the new ones. Hey, this is the time to do it.
But I think if you, again, I would come back and say that if you're showing a scatter plot behind the standard error of the mean, then that's okay.
Well, I would disagree, because the scatter plot you showed in the example, that the standard error of the mean is just tiny, okay, and is totally non-informative.
Well, I agree, but if you've got the scatter plot with all the individual...
That's what's informative, but the standard error of the mean should not be there, so...
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next question. By the way, let me just say that we may sound like we're acting like the police or something like that. We're really trying to, one of the reasons we're having this is we actually have an educational mission, and we think by educating people better, we can avoid some of these problems later. A question in the back.
My question was, what happens if you ask for the original data files of a gel or something else? What's the process that happens after that? If it looks like there was no manipulation, do you publish the original figure, or do you replace the figure? Does it go to the reviewers?
Kara, why don't you answer?
I was going to say, it totally depends on, what we find, but, and also where it is in the review process.
Right.
But if it looks like in the original figure that there was some splice site that wasn't indicated, but once we received the original data and there was actually no splice site, it was just something that happened, during the compression, then we'll just ask them to revise the figure so that, there won't be any further questions in the future.
Hi, I took note of all of the resources that you mentioned, and I think they're very helpful for me as I'm supposed to revise our undergraduate biochemistry lab manual this year. I just wondered, are you aware of any resource that's more targeted towards the undergraduate curriculum, or do you think it's better if I incorporate more of what you've presented today?
I'm not. Kara, are you?
With regards to image processing, the second resource, I think the online tools, I can't remember what it's called now, but I think it was the second one down. That one was a really good website for just going through the basics and showing you what's good and what's not good in image processing.
I really like the part about as was mentioned previously, about the standard error and the mean and standard deviation. It was a very good visual. I thought the whole thing was very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And again, we're not quite sure exactly what form, but we're going to make this all publicly available, and would encourage people to use it widely in our educational mission.
Can I go to another topic? You showed examples of acceptable contrast change and non-acceptable contrast change. But I noticed even in your acceptable contrast change, you did lose data, and some of the bands actually were lost. So it seems like a very slippery slope to be on, because if you tell authors, well, you can adjust the contrast a little bit, it's okay. it seems to me that that's another no-no, that in fact contrast changes that lose data basically are unacceptable.
You know,
I mean, ideally, you shouldn't be adjusting the contrast at all, but I know that sometimes it does help in the presentation. It is a slippery slope.
yeah, question.
At some point when you, like, especially with IHC images, if you don't adjust the contrast, you're not going to see anything in a paper.
Right.
I mean, it looks perfect on your screen. It looks absolutely beautiful. But how do you deal with that changing the second you put it into a PowerPoint and it's on, or the second you put it into a paper and it's on a cheap printout? I mean, it's just a black, there's nothing to see. So how do you kind of go with that, you know, change from media to media and what you end up losing with visibility?
So to my way of thinking, I think what you see in reproduction shouldn't distort anything that was in the original data and shouldn't hide anything that was in the original data.
Right.
So that's my feeling. I think saying there's no adjustment to contrast is probably not realistic, because particularly in IHC images you often need to do that to get the color balance right or whatever it is. So I think we've got to have some flexibility in there, but the key is to make sure that it looks like the original data, you know, what on the microscope when you collect the IHC image or whatever. So to some extent we have to go on faith. You know, we can't go back and look down the microscope when the data is collected, but if there are any indications that the image has been inappropriately manipulated in, you know, when our expert reviewers review them, then and when Cairo has a look at them, you know, that's when we'll go back to and ask for the original data and try and make sure that it really is a true representation.
Getting, you know, touching on this question and the previous one, it actually is probably even more complicated than that. Let's say I'm running a Kamasi gel stain on a protein gel. I can actually, before I even take the image, I can adjust that simply by destaining a long time and adding lamb's wool to soak up some of the Kamasi and things like that. And, you know, the question is whether it's appropriate, whether that's a good gel or when it first comes out of the Kamasi with all the blue background. So there is a point at, you know, which we probably can't, you know, make the decisions. But again, I think it's pretty much common sense. Like I say, I think you know, want to show all the relevant data, depending on the experimental situation.
I think Roger said it best. You know, it should be a true representation of, you know, what was you originally held in your hand when you processed your film. So I think that's the best way.
One more tough question.
Sure, we've got plenty of time. We may or may not have an answer.
JBC is not a favorite of Retraction Watch, and I think journals are probably truthfully afraid of being sued. I know the JBC has done much better in making retractions public, but it's still a very tough issue. With someone, you say the paper is retracted and they sue the journal, and I guess the Journal of Biological Chemistry has enough resources to make it so that you don't want that to happen. But how is the journal dealing with that at this point?
Yeah, let me take a stab at that first. I think in this, certainly in the past year since I've been editor-in-chief, we've become more open. I think as opposed to what we did in the past, we've actually specified the figures where the problems are in particular papers. Before that, we're pretty vague about that. So we've changed our what we now in our additions and corrections and our retractions, then up to a certain point. And by the way, correct me if I'm saying anything wrong here, Kara, because you do this every day, and well, I feel some days I think I am too, but not all day long. So yeah, there are situations, and I don't really want to get into all the gradations of things that do happen. Like I say, we sometimes it's appropriate, particularly if we think something was a very honest mistake, to publish an addition or correction. Sometimes there will be a withdrawal. We distinguish between what we call a withdrawal, which is action on the part of the author, and a retraction, where where the journal actually has to retract a paper. Either way, it's going to show up in the web site with a box across there basically saying the paper isn't any good anymore. Beyond that, there are some situations in which it gets more complicated, and since in the last year we actually haven't been to court yet, but and we do actually have legal counsel at the JBC, so we get the. I think the general answer is that legal counsel says as long as we're doing our job right, we're safe, and so we'll pursue that. We don't invite lawsuits, and we're not picking on. We don't want to pick on people, but we're just trying to make sure that the best papers are in JBC and that they are reproducible and help the rest of the scientists. This will continue to evolve, and we're thinking about it all the time. Are there any more questions? Okay, I think I'd like to thank again Bio-Rad for helping sponsor this, and also Roger and Keru, and for all of you who took the time to attend. I hope you've learned something. I hope also you'll go away not with the idea that JBC is really tough and nasty about all of these things, but that we're trying to do the right thing, and we're trying to help you and educate the community about how to do things best to address this big problem of reproducibility in science. And like I say, we work very hard to uphold the standards at JBC. We don't check everything in every paper. We don't really have the resources to. I don't know that any journal really has the time to or resources to check everything, but we will check things as we think we need to, and we hope that the day will come when everybody will send in really nice images and gels and everything else. Thank you for attending.